Sway Health.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brittany Quemby, and my guest today is someone who has truly turned, her personal journey into a platform for change. I think few people understand the challenges and opportunities of our healthcare system, quite like our guest, Erica Olenski. She is an advocate, a nonprofit founder, and last year's Patient Advocate of the Year at the Sway Health Awards. Erica continues to inspire patients, families, healthcare leaders with her vision for a more compassionate, trauma-informed future. Erica, I'm so glad that you're here with me today. Thank you for joining the show.
I am so honored to be here. It's my pleasure.
So, Erica, you are active and passionate patient advocate for yourself and for your son, August. For those who are watching and listening who don't know you yet, can you just tell us a little bit about your journey and your advocacy work as of late?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with my own journey. I myself have been dealing with several kind of autoimmune complexities throughout the years of my life, many of which showed up when I was a middle schooler or high schooler age. I was a lifelong patient with asthma and eczema and kind of always had some of those issues. And then when I was in my early 20s, I started to develop a more aggressive form of alopecia, which is a fancy word for hair loss, which started out at the time as just kind of two little spots on the back of my head, but over the course of a decade or so, grew into complete hair loss, where I lost all of the hair on my head, lost all of my eyebrows, all of my arm hair, all of my eyelashes. And so a part of my advocacy, I suppose, in terms of my own health journey has been helping raise awareness around a condition like that, which it really was accelerated in part with, if you guys remember the slap that happened several years ago with Will Smith and Chris Rock.
Yeah.
That hit home because I was like, oh my gosh, this is that thing that I've had my whole life that no one's really understood or known, now thrown right in the kind of pop culture spotlight. So that
Mm,
was a very interesting experience. Alongside alopecia, I also more recently have been navigating something called topical steroid withdrawal syndrome,
mm,
which I developed as a complication from a steroid medication that I was prescribed about 2 or 3 years ago. And
mm,
there's a lot of damage that comes from a small patient population that is prescribed steroids, and that damage can be systemic. And so I've been in a recovery process, healing from that. And thankfully, I think turning a corner and feeling a lot better, but it's been quite a grueling experience on the personal front. Alongside my personal patient experience, I also, over the past 6 years, was the caregiver and mom to a young boy, my son August, who was diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer at 5 months old, and really threw us for a loop. We didn't expect the diagnosis. He was a full-term baby, exclusively breastfed and living his best life
mm,
and big and healthy. Um, but unfortunately, we faced some circumstances with his own health that many families and many patients across the globe do throughout time. And so, in his journey as a cancer patient, through his initial diagnosis and three recurrences, as well as a brainstem stroke that he endured as a complication from one of his brain tumor resections, we experienced healthcare in a way that I never expected we would. Having grown up professionally in this industry, especially the healthcare innovation and healthcare technology
mm,
space, and knowing the organizations and the companies trying to solve for problems around patient engagement and patient empowerment, I was familiar with all of that. And then finding ourselves walking this very acute and complex journey, it was so eye-opening to me how many spaces our healthcare system really let not just even the patients down, but the families that surround them and even their communities as well.
mm. Yeah, it's such a difficult thing, and I applaud you for sharing and being so strong to be able to be that person. And it's so powerful how you can turn such personal challenges into, something that's so powerful for other families and an advocacy for other people. Um, you know, through this journey, you've had different, obviously, challenges and opportunities within the healthcare system. How has your perspective changed or maybe grown over the years during this whole journey, with yourself and with August?
So I have reflected on this a lot because even today I remain an optimist and a glass half full
Mm.
person, and I have conceded to the fact at this point that I am forever a glass half full person. Or I like to joke sometimes that it's like a coffee cup half full because I
Right,
drink a lot
right.
of coffee as well. Um,
Yeah.
but that optimism is a poignant perspective. And years ago, actually, before August was diagnosed, I read a quote from the Dalai Lama, and I'm going to summarize it because I can't quote it offhand. But the
Mm,
quote is something like, optimism isn't being blind to the realities that exist in a situation. It's a choice in maintaining a perspective while you seek to find the best possible solution that may also carry something positive as you try to solve a problem.
mm,
And even, gosh, it was probably 2 weeks before he got diagnosed, I actually shared that quote with a picture of him on Instagram, almost in like a prophetic way, in hindsight, because that one quote really embodied so much of what we tried to maintain as we navigated that journey. Optimism that we embraced was so much more than feeling depressed and sad and overcome by our circumstances. Instead, it was no, we're going to choose to make the best possible scenario out of this terrible situation. And, in some cases, that might look like, celebrating a birthday in the hospital and
mm,
throwing up streamers all over the room to celebrate that birthday, instead of, just conceding to a single cupcake and calling it a day. It was going above and beyond in some cases that you make the most out of that situation and that circumstance to the best you can. And we tried to do that in everything we did. And that was true not just in our family interactions, but it was also in the therapies we adopted and the different adjunctive options that we tried to embrace and carry alongside our traditional treatments that we were adhering to. And I think that helped us not just keep a positive mindset throughout the journey, but also in that space we were able to uncover some learnings as well. It was, oh my gosh, one, where are things more resistant than we should have them be if we're trying to be positive and trying to be optimistic and find the best possible scenario with the circumstance? Um, how does that optimism fuel that experience? But then also, where were those points of resistance along the way that maybe systemically that we endured as well? And it was in those experiences, having had context on the industry, that it became very clear, oh my gosh, we're letting some people down. And funny enough, there's some really low hanging fruit opportunities for us to make
mm,
things significantly better if we just
mhm,
approach them with an open and creative mindset. And I think that's my biggest learning is where the system has failed in some places. There are the tactical, practical solutions. There are the digital solutions as well. But there's also these very clear and accessible human opportunities
mm.
that we could do and embrace in our whole process of how we deliver medicine in our country that could make things significantly better for the people that have to experience it.
Totally. And that resonates so much. My mother was in the hospital with my brother when he was younger with leukemia. And it just as you said that in terms of birthdays are making it just a positive atmosphere or the glass half full, making what those situations are to be more positive. I remember her making little ornaments during Christmas and putting them all up in everybody's room over Christmas and just those little things that just make the scenario just that a little bit better, right? And a little bit, better of a memory, I guess. And And the point of is it's not always have to be so difficult. Like you said, there's just those human elements that resonate so much with people and with patients and caregivers that, sometimes it doesn't have to be so hard. You look at those smaller aspects of the journey and of the experience, and that can go much more further than anything else.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so we talk about some of, the priorities, the health priorities that are important to patients and families. We kind of touched on a little bit about that, but what is the most important um, in terms of health priorities for patients and families today in kind of this healthcare journey?
I think there's a twofold answer to that. I think that there's, the one practical or tactical answer, and that's, if you get a diagnosis, you want to heal from that
Mm,
diagnosis. How we define healing is also up for debate, arguably, because there's a way to like alleviate the symptoms or that the marker perhaps that leads to a diagnosis of some kind. But healing can also, embody, how does your physical body and then also your emotional and spiritual body regain a sense of balance after an experience like that. And so I think that there's something to be said around that practical solution, or not practical, but around that journey where healing is a little bit more and a lot more in some cases than just addressing the diagnosis and whatever clinically is being focused on. So I think that's been a big takeaway, I think, from our perspective and our experience was just, how much more there is to a healing journey and how much we don't address perhaps in our current system, and the current methodology. And maybe it's not our health system's responsibility necessarily to heal us emotionally and spiritually from these experiences. But as a society, we still don't have the support mechanisms in place. And so I think that there's still a ripe opportunity for us to support each other in those experiences so that when we come out on the other side of them, we are in a position to share and contribute meaningfully back to our communities rather than continuing to have to endure, whatever it is that came from as maybe a complication from that experience.
yeah, exactly. And I love how you say that, it's much, I think of it as in much more than just kind of the medicine or the diagnosis or, what you're given to help that healing. I think, from a spiritual healing or like you said, an emotional healing or, any type of thing that's above that medicine, I think is important and maybe needs to be focused on a little more in that journey than what we maybe currently do today. Because I think that goes a long way. You hear a lot of people who benefit from that non kind of medicinal healing, but they are utilizing different methods and different spiritual um, journeys to help them heal in different ways.
Yeah, there's so much more to our experience as humans than just a mechanical
Mm,
issue, right? And so often throughout history, especially, and I don't want to say, Western medicine versus like Eastern or holistic
mm,
medicine. I don't think that that's it. I think it's just recognizing and honoring the human experience of what care is like. And I think
mm,
it's what we're learning as a society. And I mean, you go on any social media platform in 5 minutes, you're going to see something of somebody sharing something about how your mental and spiritual or psychological experience of your humanity is integral to your healing for your physical. And what manifests physically sometimes is complicated by the intellectual, spiritual, mental components. And so I think honoring the whole person and honoring the whole experience of what it's like to be human is essential for us as an industry practically going forward. If we want to see good outcomes, we want to see people heal and we want to see them thrive with the goal of getting them back to a place where they again can contribute back meaningfully to the communities in which we live and learn and thrive.
mm.
That should be the goal, right?
Yeah.
And we also should mitigate where possible the damage to those that surround those patients and their journeys. So if we're looking at
Hmm.
only the measure of one individual's health as a measure of the outcomes and how well we
Hmm.
did, but then, three family members that supported them in that journey now are suffering from complications in their own health as a result of that. Well, then we didn't win. We didn't solve anything. We actually made the problem worse. So we need to be looking at, I guess, not even just the whole person, but that's where I really try to raise attention and awareness around family-centered care, because the
Hmm.
families in which we deliver the care and those that are responsible for closing gaps that aren't addressed systemically are going to experience their own version of what's delivered. And we should be looking at their well-being alongside the patients as a measure of our success.
Yeah, I love that answer. I love that you said that. And, I want to touch on that a little bit more in terms of, the caregiver journey. That rings home for me. My mother is a caregiver for my stepdad. Um, After a traumatic brain injury, and she cares for him at home. So, I'm curious for you as a caregiver, and kind of talking about that caregiver journey, what do you wish healthcare leaders, better understood about that journey? And, maybe what are some meaningful ways that they could better support families? Because it's tricky unless you're actually in that role as a caregiver, I think, to really kind of put yourself into that, those shoes. But, maybe you can share a little bit about what you think that, some things that they could do to better support the caregiver role.
Well, I think one thing that we're learning, and one thing we're learning as an industry and as a discipline and people that are practicing this, is the impact and role of trauma and what that's like on our well-being as individuals. And so there's an emerging discipline. It's been actually around and established for several decades, but it's really more recently gaining some momentum. And that's the awareness around how our brain responds to situations when they're put into a fight or flight state of mind. So in our nervous system is feeling threatened in some way, right? And that happens so frequently, especially in these hospital environments where you get admitted, or you just anyone listening, or even yourself, think back to a time that maybe you were hospitalized or you were with somebody that you cared about who was hospitalized, if you don't have a
Mhm.
firsthand experience to reference, and how formative that journey was, even if it was a small, 12-hour window of time. Let's say you just
Right.
had some trouble breathing or had, complications from a flu or, some respiratory infection, and you needed to go to the hospital and get some support. That experience, even just getting into the hospital and being in that space, is put your body into a state of fight or flight. You're like, oh my
Mm.
gosh, this is serious. And so now you're hyper vigilant. Well, what we're learning is that our brains react to that situation in a very specific way as well. And in
Mm.
many cases, what happens is our brains start to kind of narrow our focus. And so when we're feeling safe and relaxed, we can kind of perceive our environment around us. But when we're hyper focused on a circumstance like you're feeling threatened or you're feeling scared or uncomfortable, our brain not only narrows that focus, but also it loses its ability to do certain things that we would define as executive functioning. And
Mm.
so when we look at that experience in context to things like patient engagement, right? We talk about how are we engaging patients
Right.
meaningfully, and how do we make sure that we're supporting them in their journeys, but then we expect them, and maybe their caregivers as well, who are undergoing the same stresses, we expect them to react or respond or engage with us in a certain way, and then we're confused as to why they can't.
Right.
Well, it's because their brains are physically incapable of meeting us in that space when they're in those circumstances. And so I
Mm.
think that was very eye-opening for me. So as we went through our cancer journey, it meant that we had a lot of inpatient admissions, a lot of inpatient discharges, in and out of the hospital all the time. But every single time we got admitted, it was still the same, oh my gosh, hypervigilance. I feel like a little bit stressed right now. Well, now your
Right.
brain's narrowing, it's getting, getting threatened, and that chronic exposure to those heightened circumstances create physiological responses. And so this is where we start to learn about why, in fact, whole person family-centered care is truly so valuable, is it provides us access literally to the outcomes that we want to see, because it gives us the opportunity to meaningfully engage with the patients and their families in their care.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't honor and recognize that whole person approach, we're going to completely miss the mark and our expectations are misplaced because those people
Mm-hmm.
can't show up for us in the way we're expecting them to. And those
Right.
initiatives, therefore, are going to fall flat and they're not going to be successful. And
Right.
so, what I want to do is, I want to raise more awareness around that reality of that experience. And it's not just, oh, it's a high stress, but your brain physically reacts and responds in a way that's very nuanced and somewhat predictable because we know the
Mm-hmm.
nervous system is feeling a certain way. So, we need to meet the patients and their families and their caregivers in that space and not expect them to do something that they are not capable of doing in that moment.
Right. And it's such an important point because, I think often we see the caregiver as, being the supportive person for the patient, which, they are in a lot of the aspects, but also who's caring for the caregiver? There's not a lot of people who are on that end caring for the caregiver, and that goes under is overlooked. And then that's when all of the other stuff happens, and then it starts taking a toll on them, or you get the burnout, and then they physically
Yeah.
can't also care for the patient. So like you said, then it's a vicious cycle of what are we even doing here, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's also where we start to intersect other projects or initiatives when it comes to even like clinical experience, right? If
Mm,
our caregivers that are unofficial caregivers are in that definition,
mm-hmm,
the patient's caregivers, if they're experiencing this and the patients are experiencing this, and the clinical teams, we have a reasonable expectation to think that they're experiencing some sort of hypervigilance as well.
mm,
What are we doing?
mm-hmm,
Right. As an industry,
right.
expecting anybody to show up and engage meaningfully with each other and have a conversation that leads to certain outcomes, if any one of the people engaging in this conversation are incapable of showing up that way, well, then what are we doing? Why are we expecting that of them?
Yeah, it's such an important part of I think the journey that goes, you know, overlooked. So, hopefully, like you said, being more advocate or, making those points and having those conversations will, hopefully push the needle a little bit to the right direction, right?
It's part of what actually fuels my optimism around technologies like AI.
Mm,
And I've been a longtime champion for AI tech in a few different ways, but I think more than ever before, we're actually now presented with some tools that can give us the ability to bridge that gap. Whereas
mm,
if you have all these people showing up to these experiences and they're not capable of engaging meaningfully cognitively in that way, well, then, AI can start to, take care of some of the administrative tactical things for us and maybe
mm,
alleviate just enough to actually allow and permit and create the right environment for everyone to feel safe enough to show up in an engaging way. And then what
yeah.
therefore is possible with the technology bridging that gap for us, well, again, what kind of outcomes are measurable and what's possible in those circumstances?
Hmm.
I have a lot of, again, glass coffee cup half full.
Yeah,
I'm not doom and gloom when it comes to that technology as much as I am still a realist in it as
for
well.
sure.
I think that there's a lot of potential and opportunity if we keep the right focus and right
Hmm.
intention in place.
Yeah, exactly. Got to be, hopeful in, some aspects of that. And it's, I think it's better to be, like you said, in most situations, it's better to be hopeful than not because, you know, why not?
Yeah. Yeah. I think in a balanced, non-toxic positivity way. Like you can't
Yeah,
be, in denial at the same time. You still have to be honoring of
right.
that experience. But yeah, we've got nothing to lose by honoring the experience while simultaneously keeping that optimism and maintaining that optimism.
Lovely. I want to shift gears a little bit. I know you've talked about August artists a little bit. If people have seen some of your advocacy work and some of your videos, but it's such a beautiful initiative that touches so many families. Um, do you mind sharing what it is and the impact that it has had and is continuing to have in the in the space?
Absolutely. So August Artists, we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit and founded, I think, formally in 2022. So we've been around for a couple years now. Candidly, several false starts in that time
Hmm.
as we've navigated my son's cancer journey. But but we're an organization that really was inspired from our own lived experience in the hospital. We saw firsthand how therapeutic not just access to art was, but just the service of what art provides in that environment.
Mm,
When we were on the oncology floor, it was, oh gosh, the story goes, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting in the oncology floor, bright lights in the hallway, our room was dark, but I was drawing a picture for my son on his hospital room door. It was a picture of Wally, and I had been inspired to draw it because there was a couple other families that had use these window crayons to draw pictures. And every now and then nurses would also partake and they would contribute their artwork as well to the space. But this artwork became such a fixture for that environment because
mm,
most things in a hospital are pretty sterile. So when you
mhm,
are on an oncology, for example, you also typically have to face kind of deal with the circumstances around immunocompromised patients and
mm,
and you yourself or the patients in those environments typically are immunocompromised, which means you really can't go and enjoy the hospital amenities like the rest of the patients in the facility. So
right.
oftentimes what that looks like is, okay, I'm going to get out of my room today. I'm going to step out my room and I'm going to go walk to the end of the hallway and come back. And that's going to be a big deal for me today. And what the artwork did for us in those moments is it created an experience for that, walk to the end of the hallway and back. You leave your hospital room and you're, oh, I get to go look at this picture and this picture and this picture. And each door became a big milestone. And that
Mm,
artwork on the door was a fixture for that experience. And it was a very impactful, much more than I ever realized, a way more impactful um, experience than I ever anticipated. And
mm,
so I was drawing this picture at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was contemplating this existential question of, if my son doesn't survive, how do I give back to the community and honor his legacy? And if he does survive, again, how do we give back and pay it forward? Because we've been supported in our space, and how do I and we as a family contribute back to make things better for others that have to face these circumstances?
mm,
And so August Artist was born from that, because I learned also in that space that the nurses were paying for these window crayons out of pocket because they saw the
mm,
impact the families benefited from having access to this kind of artwork, either to
right.
make themselves or the nurses to make art for them on their behalf. And so the thought process was, let's just go create an organization that can, at a minimum, donate crayons to
Right.
hospitals across the country so that one, no nurses are paying out of pocket for these resources. And it's such a low tech solution. Honestly, it's just kind
Right.
of off the radar for a lot of hospitals as well. It's not a matter of that they can't necessarily afford it. It's just a prioritization problem. And
Mm,
it's, again, not that they don't think that it's valuable. It's just who's going to own it and who's going to manage the kind of turnkey experience of that resource. So our organization focuses on kind of three pillars now. As we've developed over the years and kind of refined our process and what exactly we do, it's really three core things alongside advocacy, which is a big piece of it. It's donating the window crayons to the facilities that we partner with. And then the other piece that I think is probably the most inspiring to me as the kind of organization's executive director is that we commemorate the artwork that the families make because
mm,
something about the artwork that's on these doors is you can't bring it with you when you leave. When you get
right.
discharged, that artwork stays or it gets erased.
Mm,
So what we do is we work with the teams there, either social work or child life or some other resources within the hospital, and we work with them and the patient families to get pictures of the artwork, and then we convert it into a digital asset that then they can use. They can put it on a blanket, they can put it on a t-shirt, they can use it as a fundraising tool, which, as we know, a cancer diagnosis is incredibly toxic from a
mm,
financial perspective and financial health perspective. So it
mhm,
gives them something that they can actually work with that helps offset the costs of those experiences.
mm,
But then also in context to the trauma conversation and what our nervous system, thinks about, um, the subtleties and being able to capture the strokes, if you will, the little imperfections in the artwork that give it personality. By capturing the essence of those in a physical photo that we then turn into this asset, it gives them a functional thing that we can lean on that actually helps with their trauma recovery. Because for
Mm,
starters, what it does is it helps validate that those experiences that they happened in this foreign environment that's very sterile and hard to reference cognitively, that
right.
artwork becomes a fixture for that experience and says, yes, what you went through was real, what you went
Mm,
through was valuable, and we know you're on the other side of this. But this artwork can be a medal of sorts, the same way you'd get a
mm,
medal at the end of a race. That artwork can be a medal to honor what you went through in those spaces that validate that what it was real and that you are healing from it. And my vision is that, these pictures are more than just, a cartoon transposed onto a window with crayons, right? But
right.
but that this artwork becomes a vessel for the stories that we tell ourselves in these spaces, the stories we tell others about what happened when we were there, and
Mm,
become a again like that celebratory commemorative
mm,
thing that we can use to help honor and recognize like this was real, and I am now forever shaped and a different person having experienced that, and I'm going to go tell others about who I am now having gone through
mhm.
that, and healing from that.
I love that so much. And it's such a, I think, a beautiful example of how, creativity, and even just small joys can bring, healing. And like you said, also be something tangible that can, help patients, celebrate, healing or what they've gone through. Or like you said, just even being an anchor of letting them know that, like you said, this was something that you accomplished, that you went through, that was real, and that they can, lean on after the fact. I absolutely love that.
And back to it doesn't have to be a high-tech solution, right? It
Right,
can
right.
be something like literal crayons drawn on a window
Mm-hmm.
that improve the experiences we have of healthcare today.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's so great. So I want to talk a little bit about your patient advocate win, this year. So you were named patient advocate of the year this year at Sway Health Awards. What does this recognition mean to you? How does it, reflect your broader mission for patients and families kind of going forward?
Well, first of all, it was an incredible honor to be recognized by this community for that, for the journey that we went through and just kind of what we've made from that. For me, it represented its own form of validation, right? It's the same way we
Mm,
commemorate artwork. It was something that told me, you're on the right track, at least sharing what you are, and that you're really helping move the needle in terms of decision making in this industry. And so it was validating, probably more than anything, that the work we're doing is important and appreciated, and being honored and recognized by this community. I mean, it's already an amazing community. So being seen in that way by the world, this group of people in particular, was very special. And in context to our own patient journey, it came at a very poignant time as well.
mm,
I think earlier this year, I didn't know what we were going to be facing in the months ahead. And I'm sad to share that my son did not make it past June. Our journey ended at the end of June physically, when it came to his cancer treatment. And he transitioned on June 26th, about 2 months after
oh
receiving
boy.
this award, which again, was
Mm,
so validating and appreciated. What I hope and want from this journey, though, as a patient advocate, and sharing our story, is helping to show or maybe inspire strength in others to share their stories, because I think
mm,
the stories are really what are so profound and compelling for all of us. It's the stories we tell ourselves, and then it's the stories we tell each other that are shaping the way this industry is evolving. And like, we have technologies like AI that are completely transforming this entire landscape of what we've all come to know as healthcare technology and healthcare innovation. But what do you do with that technology if you don't understand the human experience of everything,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so for us to get these emerging technologies right, we need to have stories to help create the landscape so that we have a better understanding of what it is we're actually addressing. So that when we have the technology show up, they're serving human needs and not just serving something transactional or tactical
Right.
that we know we need to take care of, but maybe we miss the mark or create more harm as a result of that because we're not keeping those stories in mind as we work through those.
Yeah, that's so, I feel like that's so important and something that, I hope from an advocacy standpoint or even just an input standpoint that, we can do with AI because I think sometimes people, get a little bit nervous with, just straight up technology and then it's not, inputting the human element into that. So what can we do as, as you as an advocate or even just us in the healthcare industry that we can help impact, those technologies to show up, more with more humanity and, think about that the human side more than just the, like you said, the tactical side. Well, we're getting to our time here. One thing that I want to just say is how inspired I am by you and your story and everything that you've been through. It's not every day you see someone who, is so strong and is able to, talk about their such a personal experience, but then keep going to help other families, navigate their own experience. So I just think more people, should do that. And I know it's very hard to do that, but, if you were to give anybody, some advice who, wants to be more, outspoken or an advocate for better healthcare, what would you tell them? How would you, get them to, make that leap and, take that step?
We have some really incredible technologies today that give us the power to share our stories at any moment and any time. So my advice would be, your experience as a human is really important and it's valid and it's very special and sacred. And so my advice would be to find, it's not strength, but courage perhaps, or peace to
Mm,
share your story, even the little micro interactions. You don't have to tackle all of it all at once,
right.
but just raising awareness about something that maybe was harder than you imagined and say, this was hard.
Mm,
This didn't feel good. I didn't like this. Maybe I did like this thing. And it's okay if they're just like little micro interactions. I can't tell you how many times I shared a post on Instagram and talking about, just a hospital admission process and was like, here are three things I would think of when I get admitted to the hospital, or if my son's admitted to the hospital, what are three things that I remember to bring with us, for example? Like what's our go bag?
mm,
Well, over time that evolved into things like, food. What kind of
right.
snacks do you have? And it's not just snacks like you go to a movie theater and like dump all the junk food into your bag and say, we're going to just binge and have a great time. But having
Right.
good quality food, even if it's, vegetables or fruit or something that is going to be nourishing. um, I shared a story about that, and so it felt really insignificant in context to that of the bigger picture of, oh, we're getting admitted for, low oxygen and respiratory issues, with the trach and all sorts of complexity. But just talking about, something as simple as food or something as simple as, I looked out the window and I felt this way today. And I didn't realize, how much time feels differently in the hospital. Those little stories, even if they're like tiny vignettes, are still valuable and they still impact people and they still resonate with others. And I think as human beings, we're story spirits, perhaps, for lack of a better word.
Mm.
We're
Yeah.
storytelling entities. And so, there's a beautiful opportunity in sharing the stories that we experience real time. And I think things and technologies like social media create unprecedented opportunity to be able to tell those stories in a meaningful way that reach a lot of people and impact others. And so I guess my encouragement would be just share your story, even if it's the smallest, most tiny, what feels like insignificant thing. It might impact somebody else in a way that's unimaginable. And that might hit them in a moment that they need that message. They might need that validation. They
Mm,
might need to be seen in a way that they didn't expect. And those small little things do, in fact, matter. And those little small stories do, in fact, impact others. And I
Mhm.
think there could be more of that across the board when it comes to especially the experience of healthcare in this country and how we're going to make it better for everybody. It's a
Right.
monumental task. So let's just start with stories. Just share your story, even if it's the smallest thing you can imagine.
And more often, if you're experiencing it and you're having those feelings, I'm sure there's probably 10 or maybe plus more people who are also, you know, feeling that way and maybe don't have the courage to, like you said, share it. So if you share it as that first step to then, make someone else feel a little bit more at ease, or make someone have that connection that, oh, okay, like someone else is going through that. I feel like that's such a powerful thing, those shared experiences from, stories, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. I had this happen the other day, just as a brief anecdote, where I got a text message from a managed care provider for Medicaid my son had. And he's been gone 3 weeks or 3 months this coming Friday. So it's been some time, but not much time in the big picture of
No.
things. But it's been some time and enough for people to get updates on what exactly happened. And I got a text message last week that just really bothered me. And so I
Mm.
shared it on LinkedIn. And it was a text message that just said they were asking that they had been trying to reach me about scheduling his annual physical.
Oh
And
no.
and I was like, golly, I got a card from them in the mail that,
Well,
recognized that he had passed away. So why am I getting this text message? And
right.
I shared this small little piece, right? I shared a text message screenshot, which is a
Right.
small little story, right? It's a micro story. But there's so much more to that than just that one little
Mm.
story. Because it what it does is it shows and addresses to us that there's like probably some pattern or something we could learn from on the marketing side of healthcare to make this not a
Sure.
thing for people going forward,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
that probably wasn't the best idea.
Oh,
But also, I think what was so remarkable was like how much that one text message resonated with other people. I mean, the
right.
amount of people that came out from everywhere and said, "Oh my gosh, this happened to me. This happened to me, and I hated it. It was horrible. It made me so sad, or it made me re-traumatized, or it really just negatively impacted me in some way. And thank you for sharing this because I didn't think to share a single text message."
Right.
And so these stories exist all across the board in all sorts of different ways, in ways that we don't expect or imagine, but they're still important and they're still valid. And like you said, that one little thing might resonate with somebody at the moment that they need to hear it. And then be like, oh, I feel seen. I feel like they actually see me. And then now, when we're trying to address systemic change as an industry and we're trying to make things better for a lot of people,
Hmm.
why don't we start with the stories? Start
Right.
with the humanity and then address things that way. We need to stop letting technology and this mechanical philosophy be what drives innovation.
I couldn't agree more. Don't let that be the starting point that leads the way. Humanity and stories
Correct.
have to start and be the foundation of what helps us, go forward.
Healthcare is the most human experience that we have. It's
Yeah.
how we're born, it's how we die, it's how we address anything that's more complex in between those events. It's
Hmm.
how we experience life. And we have to start with being human and innovating in that space. We cannot let technology drive that for us.
I couldn't agree more, Erica. I We're at time here today, but I want to end it on that note because it's such a powerful, thing to think about. And I hope our listeners, take that, that quip and use that in their everyday life, in their work, in their personal experience, because what needs to happen. And I think we all need to have that focus every day in, like you said, in our work, in our marketing, in everything. So um I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you sharing your story. I am so happy I got to talk to you, and thank you so much.
I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you so much.